Hey everyone, so today we are going to start off our next unit by talking about one of the most important events in the history of the world, and that is the Industrial Revolution. To this point, we've talked about human history, and we've talked about a lot of important events, but none that have so rapidly changed how we live our lives than the Industrial Revolution. Not only did this create factories, not only did this move technology forward, but it's totally changed the rate at which things change. It's totally changed the rate at which we live our lives. It's totally impacted the length of time that most people live here on Earth. And for that reason, it's incredibly important to the differences within the world. And how history has sort of changed since about 230, 40, 50 years ago when the Industrial Revolution started. And so really, when we're thinking about the Industrial Revolution, we can think about the fact that it started in the mid-18th century, and it involved technological advances that started to impact and advance the production of items that would change the speed at which our world moves. And so these changes sort of resulted not only in these technological advances, but also in terms of population growth and then the movement of people from farms to cities. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people lived on farms, and now most people live in cities. And that has produced many more changes that we'll talk about today throughout this lecture. So the causes of the Industrial Revolution are quite vast. For one, the Industrial Revolution started in England in the mid-18th century or the mid-1700s. And it later spread to the United States, it later spread to Western Europe, and then eventually to the rest of the world. At this point, there really is almost nowhere that has not been industrialized in some way other than some distant, more remote part of the world where there's a very low population to begin with. And it really started in England for several reasons. For one, there was a large supply of natural resources like coal and iron ore and other fossil fuels that really powered the factories, powered the machines, and then also in the case of iron ore, allowed for those machines to be built. The other thing that was happening within English society was that rich landowners were buying up peasant farms. And so a lot of people, no longer were needed in order to do farm work. Farm technologies were also improving, and so less people were needed in order to carry out this farm work. And so now you have this labor supply that can move to the cities and that can help work in these factories for these new technologies that are being built and to create products in a more rapid fashion. Now, during the Industrial Revolution, we have several technological advances that are making huge impacts on society. The first one is in terms of making clothes, making cloth, making blankets, and that is called the spinning jenny. And we see that just above the picture here to the left. And so this helped turn cotton and wool into thread and ends up speeding up the production of textiles. Another one is the train, and that goes without explanation there. The train was created during the Industrial Revolution, allowing things to be moved at faster rates and allowing more things to be moved at faster rates. Another thing was the steam engine, and these were the machines that end up in the technology that ends up powering factories and ships, which not only speeds up travel, but also speeds up production. We also have the smallpox vaccine, where now we can better sorry about that. And now we can better, protect ourselves against disease. And so it saved millions of lives and improved healthcare in growing cities. And then you also have something that was created in the United States called the cotton gin. And the cotton gin was incredibly important, not only in terms of and consequential in terms of making it faster to produce cotton, but it also had a very negative effect as, cotton was now produced at much faster rates, making it a much more important crop, and unfortunately led to a greater demand for slavery in the United States, which probably prolonged how long slavery existed in the United States, as more labor was needed in order to produce more cotton around the world. But the last two things that the Industrial Revolution, or at least this first part of the Industrial Revolution, brought us, and there was many more than the 6 things I'm listing here, but one was the Bessemer process. And this turned iron into strong, lightweight steel, in which more buildings were now being made of steel, which has totally changed our world and allowed us to build buildings that were taller and stronger than ever before. And so skyscrapers would not be possible without the Bessemer process, as you could not build brick buildings that were that tall. The last thing here is just something that makes food much safer to consume, and that is the pasteurization process. And created by Louis Pasteur, this kills bacteria and other small microorganisms in liquids to allow them to be safer to eat and drink. And this started with milk, but also spread to, other foods and liquids that we consume that make it much easier and safer to consume. So one byproduct of the Industrial Revolution was also the economic system that we use in this country, known as capitalism. And a lot of countries around the world use at this point, called capitalism. So capitalism is an economic system where individuals can both own property and the ways to produce goods and services. Or, another way to put it is just owning businesses. And so this was created by Adam Smith in the 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations. And under his ideas, he believed that everyone should be able to make economic decisions based on what was best for them, or also called their self-interest. And what self-interest would do, and if you're making decisions that are best for you, and this isn't going to be made for you, then this would drive people to decide to make items or services available that people wanted. And this would cause other businesses then to be created that would result in competition. And this competition would force businesses, because they are competing with other people for sales, to make better products, and would also drive prices to lower in the competition for customers. So for instance, if you think about like gas, right? If there are 2 gas stations on, different corners across from each other, they have to sort of compete for customers. And so if one gas station lowers their price, well, then that's going to drive everyone to go there because they want to pay less for gas, right? And so this is going to cause the other gas station to possibly lower their gas prices as well, so that they can get more people to buy their gas. And so this is going to be, in the end, a net good for people under these theories. Now, Smith also believed that the government should have little to no control over the economy, and this was called laissez-faire, or hands-off economics. And so the government under his system should not interfere with business, and this was very different than the age of absolutism that we were coming out of at the time, where the king could sort of make these economic decisions based on what they desired to happen. So with capitalism, though, has come several criticisms. And so even though capitalism has a positive impact on the Industrial Revolution, it created a lot of wealth for business owners to continue to expand and to sell more items, and it made some people very wealthy, and it made the middle class, there are several criticisms of this system. For one, a lack of interference by the government allowed for individual greed to negatively impact national economies. Another way that it impacted things was that poor working conditions for workers were very common during the first 100 years of the Industrial Revolution. We're going to talk about that and what that entailed more in just a couple minutes here. But you're also going to see an uneven distribution of wealth, where some people are fabulously wealthy and have a lot. Other people may not have food to eat, just based on how the market sort of settled out for them. And so this led to other people trying to think of alternative possible systems for economic growth. And out of this comes the idea of communism and socialism, in which everyone has equal items and things, and also that the government would control most things and decide for the people what would be best in order to most equitably split up the nation's resources, which also has its own drawbacks and positives as well. So on the last slide, I mentioned that these systems really impacted work. And the changes to work, not only because of capitalism, but because of the Industrial Revolution, was that most people went from working at home, right? If you live on a farm your entire life, you are working at home, whether it's on the land or in the house, making products, or participating in what it was called the cottage industry, in which most people built most of the things that they would use on a daily basis, from clothes to the butter that you had in the house to all the food that you consume, to everything that you would possibly need was made on the farm usually, right? Your mom probably made your clothes. Your dad probably made the table that your family sat at dinner. All of those things were being made by hand. But under the Industrial Revolution, you started to see more and more and more people working in factories, so working away from the home. And early factories really were not great. They had terrible working conditions, and they had little in terms of laws that could make work safer. As we saw, the goal of the government under capitalism, under pure capitalism, was not to interfere in the economy. And so there was very little protection coming from the government in terms of work. And so machines were very dangerous. There was little inspection being done of these machines. People worked very long hours, so 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, for very little pay. Children were allowed to work in factories. A lot of children left school early. As soon as they had barely learned how to read, they were in the factories working for these same very long hours, 6 days a week. And it was not good at all for the worker. And so about 100 years after the creation of the Industrial Revolution, you start to see labor movements that start to rise up, where people are saying enough is enough of this and begin to demand better conditions for workers. And that's really where we get a lot of our feelings about work that we have to this day, where we have a 5-day work week, where we only work 8 hours at a stretch, where we have better pay. And it was because of these movements that these things came into form. And so we see here just the changing nature of work. On the left, we have the cottage industry, in which people are working in their home and, working on the things that would later be created by a factory that we see on the right, where hundreds of people are working in the same general areas, and they are working much more in a systematic fashion. So another group that was changed by the Industrial Revolution was women. And for women, for the first time, many women are starting to work outside of the home. And so even though this is a net positive, and many young women for the first time could live away from home and were sending money back to their families who may still live on farms, even though this is a good thing, there was also drawbacks to this. Due to competition from male and child labor, conditions were often very, very unequal for women. And they often made as little as 1/3 of what men made. And on top of that, because things were so unequal, and because women were seen as less valuable in the workplace than men or even children, oftentimes, women started to organize to fight for changes to this inequality. And we started to see the rise of women's rights movements happen when we talked about the French Revolution just last unit. But we're starting to see more and more women start to fight for their rights, first in labor movements, but then also to fight for equal rights in society as a whole. And so we start to see the movement for the right to vote happen in many countries, including our own, and finally happen about 100 years ago. So another outgrowth of the Industrial Revolution was that as the Industrial Revolution wore on, these European nations where the Industrial Revolution first took place needed greater amounts of natural resources in order to keep the factories not only going, but also to continually increase their market share and to sell more goods. And so in order to not only make more goods that they could then sell in their own country, they also wanted to sell to more goods in new markets. And so one solution that they end up going with was to take over other smaller, weaker nations and to force them to give up natural resources and to trade with that European power. And so this becomes known as imperialism. And this is a term that we have seen in the course of this year of history. But imperialism ends up, taking place in large swaths of Africa and Asia and Australia. And Africa and Asia and imperialism, and specifically African imperialism from European nations, is what we're really going to be focusing on for most of this unit. And that's what your PBA is going to be on. And so imperialism in itself, the taking over of these nations, stripped a lot of these nations of the independence to trade with who they wanted to. Now they had to trade with only one country. They oftentimes did not get the better of the deal in terms of making sure that economically this was a deal that worked out for both of them. They were often faced with violence in the taking over and the continual control of these areas. And so the Industrial Revolution in this way was quite a huge drawback in terms of the respect and the respect for humanity of these nations. And in addition to industrialization as a motivation for this sort of imperialism, there was also a rise in what is called nationalism. And nationalism is what we would popularly refer to as patriotism in the United States. And nationalism is the advancement of one's own nation, especially to the detriment of another nation. And so more and more European nations began to see themselves not just as a product of a village or a region, as we saw with feudalism, where there were a lot of small little regions, and we didn't necessarily think of France as France, but maybe you were from Paris or Nice or Marseille, which are all different French cities. But now you thought of yourself as a nation, and that started to spark more and more people to be very, very loyal to that nation and to want to see them succeed above everything else. And so that leads us into sort of looking a little bit deeper here at the positive and negative effects of the Industrial Revolution. And on the positive whole, the urban population increased. We saw more people move from the cities from the farms to the cities. You also saw a speeding up of production of goods that all of us enjoy. More and more goods became more consistent in terms of knowing the quality that you were getting, especially if the brand was something that was strong. So for instance, Coca-Cola makes millions of cans of Coke every single day. And we pretty much know what we're going to get if we open a bottle or a can of Coke. And then the human population also increased. This was another positive effect. So for the first time in human history, there was more than 1 billion people on Earth. And this was absolutely a result of the Industrial Revolution and the healthcare technological advances that were taking place. So in 200 years, we have gone from just about 1 billion people to 8 billion people here on Earth, when that had never existed in the thousands of years of human history before that. We're also seeing education increase. Public schools for the first time start opening up. Private schooling expands. More people can read, write, and do math than ever before. And this is a positive. And then a better standard of living, including better healthcare, more people with more money, more people with free time on their hands, especially after labor laws changed. And on top of that, transportation became more efficient and faster. The technological advances that were taking place in factories leads to transportation speeding up through first trains and steamboats that are moving faster than ever before. And then, eventually about 100 years later, the car comes into vogue as well. And then we also have longer lifespans and the growth of a middle class, in which there is not just rich or poor, but there is a middle area that is not necessarily rich, but can afford to, for the first time, save money, go on vacation, have the things that they needed to survive. Now, on the other hand, the Industrial Revolution also brought about several negative effects. So for one, the number of farms decreased. People bought up the land of peasants. You have many more big farms and less people living on farms and instead living in cities. You also have environmental pollution, overcrowded cities, health that is suffering from smoke inhalation from the factories. And then also, like I said, in the first 100, 150 years, and in some places around the world, unfortunately, even to this day, factories often had terrible working conditions. They were dangerous again, long hours, little pay. And then child labor as well, which luckily in the Western world is mostly eliminated in most every country. And then last but certainly not least, something that we're going to be focusing on throughout this unit is the idea that European imperialism also expanded throughout the world, but especially in Africa and Asia as well. All right, so with all of that being said, the Industrial Revolution, an incredibly, incredibly important time and significant event in human history. The world would never be the same because of it, for both positive and negative reasons. And we can see a clear difference in history before the Industrial Revolution and after the Industrial Revolution. If you have any questions, please come talk to me or Mr. Allard, and I hope all of you have a great day.